Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of Tecman Talks Dynamics. This afternoon we're having a general discussion on platforms for Dynamics and which way you should go, where you should be. So welcome to Liam Walton, Matthew Woodhouse, Liz Delaney, my partners in crime at Tecman. Liam? We've
probably over the last 5-6 years, maybe a little bit longer, we've gone from everybody almost running on their own hardware, where they would have a block of servers situated either in their office or somewhere where they would have that software installed, and they would then, their users would access it from there. So it was a fairly simple choice, and it was just who was going to get those things spun up and working. And then as the cloud has become more and more prominent, we've moved into more choices around that, and depending on where you want to have your software accessible from and where it's going to be installed, you've had some more choices. And that's where we end up with these new terms that we've just mentioned there. The traditional on-premise, we'll talk about that very briefly. And then we have something called platform as a service, we call that PaaS. And then software as a service, which we call as SaaS. And just as a very brief intro to those, I had a nice analogy given to me a few months back. And it was, the idea is if you're going to have a pizza, okay? So if you're going to have a pizza, the idea of the way we do it, if you're going to make it with your kids, you'd have to go out, you'd buy the cheese, the toppings, the sauce, the dough. Then you'd have to make sure you've got the oven ready to bake the thing. And then when it comes out, you've got to have something to eat it on, a dining room table, something to eat and drink to go with it. So all of that is your responsibility as the person providing the meal. You've got to provide everything, all the ingredients, the cooking facilities, and the dining experience. If you move to platform as a service, that's the old on-traditional, when you go and buy everything, you buy all the hardware, you've got to configure it, you've got to provide the power, what happens if the power goes off in your building, so all that disaster recovery stuff. If you then take the pizza analogy to platform as a service, all of a sudden, the only thing you have to provide is the place where you're going to actually eat it, the dinner, the dining table, and maybe the drinks. Everything else, as in the toppings, the pizza dough, the power and everything is provided for you, because you're going to put that on a platform that somebody else provides for you. So that's normally in a data center somewhere in Europe. And that's in the current one we're providing, which is Microsoft Azure instance. Microsoft provide all of those facilities to allow you to run it, and you consume those type of things. And that's a bit like a pizza delivery. They provide everything for you, and the pizza arrives and all you do is eat it. And then the final one, the software as a service, is the idea of like dining out. So I don't know, you go to your favorite pizza chain, and you don't have to do anything apart from turn up and eat the pizza that's put in front of you. You don't have to worry about the cooking, the preparation, the ingredients. You just sit there, you choose what you want off the menu, you know how much that's going to cost you, and then it arrives and you eat it and you enjoy it, and you don't have to worry about any of the responsibility. And I think when we have these different platforms, that's really what we've got to, that you choose which is the right solution for you. How much responsibility do you want to take for all of your infrastructure? If you want to do that, and you've invested heavily in that and a team of people to support it, then on-premise is the way you're probably going to look at. But most people these days are saying, my IT team could be better put into use in our business by looking at projects, strategic thinking, rather than worrying about all of those. So going to platform as a service, where they just really worry about configuring the application, getting up and running. A platform as a service is great. Software as a service, you don't have to worry about upgrading your software. Everything is delivered for you, and you just log on, connect to it via a URL, and away you go. So a very, very brief description. I'm sure you guys can add something to that, but those are the three areas we're looking at.
So I guess if you want to carry that analogy forward, in effect, with PaaS, you can have whatever combination of toppings you want, whereas with SaaS, you're limited to the 8-10 different options on the menu.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be more menu driven. You're not going to get as much flexibility to do something exactly custom. If you've got a very fussy eater with you in your group, then yeah, you're not going to get that choice of maybe removing the anchovies off your pizza if it comes on every single one. But with PaaS, you will have some ability to have some level of flexibility with the software.
I mean, and I think we're at a point now where probably SaaS, that all-inclusive option is the common preferred option by new customers coming through our door recently. Would everybody agree with that? Liz, you want to
definitely for new customers, where we've got a clean sheet of paper to work from. the majority will go onto the SaaS platform. But what are the limitations? Where should we not consider SaaS? Why would we not? Is it based on size? Is it based on complexity? Because saying that you can't customize SaaS is misleading, because you can customize SaaS, and we are customizing SaaS. We can add extensions from third parties or from ourselves onto the SaaS platform. So you can have as many customizations as you need to have. But at what point are you too fussy? At what point do you need to really go off menu and consider a PaaS platform instead?
So Matt, I think, historically we've said this is based on size of the customer, probably number of users, that crudely, but you've done some SaaS implementations recently, which are significant size, significant transactions. How have you found those?
To be honest, pretty good. We had a customer go live in January that was about 50 odd users, no real complaints with performance. The only area where they thought it was going a bit slow is because they were still using terminal services, and because people had actually got terminals, so they were having to terminal server onto a server to get onto a browser to get onto the SaaS platform. So not ideal, and that is they obviously realise that that's not exactly the future, and so we'll be rolling out at least some basic PCs to those people. Going back 18 months, SaaS was in its early days. You have to remember SaaS is still a shared back end. You don't get so much dedicated resource, but Microsoft have done a lot of work around the telemetry that sits behind that, and actually monitoring what level of servers you should be running on, because they can move it. PaaS, however, you can just put a whole load of power in there and just be done with it, and it's yours.
I haven't heard about so-called noisy neighbour syndrome on SaaS for a while now. I think that's gone away. I think it's more about your development methodology and how many table extensions you've added to that sales line table this time from different extensions. Seems to be where the performance is.
So it's how it's developed rather than what we've developed.
Yeah.
But size isn't everything, is it? It's not all about size. It's about the access you can get to the back end data as well, still on a SaaS platform. So what limitations are there? Well,
again, I'd probably say I don't consider that a legitimate excuse anymore. I mean, if a customer really is going direct to SQL to pull their data out, I know historically a lot of Jet users have used the direct to SQL option because of the speed issue. But I think those days are very much numbered, and even the way that you would do that on a PaaS platform, unless you're going to put the traditional platform on-premise style, direct to SQL is not a direction you should be going at. Things like the OData feeds, the queries that you can build these days perform much, much better than they used to. And they give you much more flexibility in that it's just a URL, so it can get upgraded, it can redeploy everywhere, and all the rest of it.
So all the limitations that we had 18 months ago, 2 years ago, they're gradually starting to disappear until actually it becomes the logical choice for most customers. If they're making the decision to start with Business Central from scratch, that's the logical decision for most.
I'd put the caveat in that. I mean, probably if you're building something new, that's why new customers are tending to go SaaS, because if you are starting from new and building a new architecture for your ERP system, then yes, I think, you would build it so that it's SaaS compliant. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't you do that? Mm-hmm. For existing customers where they've had workarounds, hacks, if you like, that have taken them into different interfaces and so on. That's a little bit more, when you've been used to something, you miss it. When you haven't, you don't. And so therefore it's a bit more difficult for existing customers to migrate. But, this is the direction of travel. I think, most of them will probably be SaaS in 5 years' time. And so they, as we've discussed on this podcast before, they should be getting SaaS ready for everything new that they do, even if they're not going back to the old stuff and ripping that up just yet.
I mean, I suppose
and that's true. Sorry, Liam, because for all the customers who've now upgraded to BC14, everything new that we do will be SaaS ready. And we're gradually starting the process to look at things that were done in the past and getting them written so that they are also SaaS ready.
Yeah, we're seeing some of them come out the other side. I mean, some of them are getting so close to being SaaS ready that actually they're going, you know what, I'm fed up of those CAL modifications anymore. Can we just get them done and do a project to convert it? And that for me is success on part of that program.
Well, yeah, because there's a significant cost benefit as well, isn't there, for being on SaaS as opposed to PaaS. So it's not an insignificant cost difference to go full SaaS.
I think the thing I was going to point out about SaaS, whether it's a compromise, I think you're probably right though. Those limitations, I think, as we defined it, are being removed all the time. It's a regular known cost. You're not going to have any surprises with that. Microsoft will guarantee how much you're paying. Everything's wrapped up in there. Your software, your infrastructure.
Till the January price increase comes around.
Yes. Okay. You always have the ability the possibility that that's going to happen, but you're not going to have a nasty surprise that if you've scaled something up and you're not aware of it, or if you used more resource than you were expecting, that is fairly fixed. And they are fixing it for 3 years, which is quite a decent commitment from Microsoft, isn't it, at the moment? All I was going to say is where for some people that ability with SaaS, which we haven't probably spoke about, is that the upgrades roll out. And that's at Microsoft's choosing when that happens. So you will get some level of notification, but I know some organisations like to have a bit more control around that. An upgrade is not just going to suddenly land on you one Monday morning. I know they've put a lot of testing in around that now, but on PaaS you do get the choice when you are going to go to that version. So I guess it depends what you want as a business. Some will see that as a good benefit. Some will see it as a little bit of a concern.
I think it's a situation you should be able to live with. But, and there's a big but here, where you've lost a lot of responsibility in terms of kind of, managing the platform with, or you pay an organisation like us to manage the platform for us. That platform is managed for you, but there is a whole bunch of other responsibilities around managing the solution.
Yes.
So, that's the so-called Devops process where, you've got to be ready because Microsoft could deploy a change out and you're only 90 days from really losing one of your key customizations because they've changed, they've put something into the platform. Now, actually, they're giving us more notice. For any serious change, they're giving us more notice than that. So we are getting probably 12 months notice of things like deprecation of SOAP is one where they've given us about two and a bit years worth of notification. Authentication's another one, important one from a security aspect, where they've given us, now over, I think it's about 12 months more before that comes around and we have to do something. But it is there that you've got to be aware of what's coming down your timeline, and that timeline moves. It doesn't ever stop, and so that deadline gets closer and closer and closer, and you can't just leave it till the last possible moment before you kind of say, okay, I've got to do this today, because the business consequences, if you don't get that right, are pretty devastating. So that's something you don't have with PaaS, where if you can't fit the upgrade in this month, you can push it off till next month. And the consequence is, well, it's still going to keep working. On SaaS, it doesn't keep working. It goes away. Microsoft take that customization out and you're left with a vanilla system potentially, which might well not be great for your business. You lose one responsibility, but you gain another.
I think you also got to take a responsibility, haven't you, around your comms. That's probably the one hurdle that we can't get over. If somebody wants to go PaaS or SaaS, but their comms aren't going to allow that at the moment, then that's probably the only sticking point now where we would probably say don't go on the cloud. I know it's becoming less and less, but there all are organisations that find themselves in remote places where it's not an option. It's great now though with people working
like
from home.
Telford.
Like Telford. there are a few dead spots dotted around, yeah. But I think working from home, it's been great, hasn't it? That when we all had to up sticks and leave nearly a year ago, anybody that was in the cloud didn't have to worry about it. They just had a URL and away they went. If you were on prem, Suddenly people having to sort out VPNs to have secure access to get back into their in-house systems and would still need to be maintained. So again, the flexibility of PaaS and SaaS there are fantastic.
I think the productivity shouldn't be underestimated either. Just being able to go to a browser on any machine you've logged onto your corporate network with, and just pull up that browser and flick straight in, and doing that from the browser, go into as many tabs as you want to. So, you can sit there with 6-8 different sessions, as they used to be called, open, and the user-based licensing works really well for that. So, that's a real plus for the future. Some people moan about going from the Windows client across the web client, but actually once you've used the web client for a while now, I think it's faster, it's more flexible, it's easier, and certainly with a secure URL, as you say, Liam, with your single sign-on password, it just works with everything else and it fits into your scenario, especially when it's SaaS. One other thing that SaaS came to mind is, the Teams integration they introduced in the autumn, in the Wave 2 release last autumn, was the first thing where you couldn't have it on premise or on PaaS. That's SaaS only. And, I think that is the beginning of I don't think they'll ever lose doing on-prem or PaaS. If you're willing to pay for it, they'll provide it. But I think you will see an increasing list of things which perhaps don't work in those two environments as opposed to SaaS.
We've seen that, haven't we, with Dynamics from a CRM perspective, where they're a few years ahead of us in the SaaS version, that they started releasing functionality first on SaaS, and then that stuff that could be replicated would come into the on-prem versions, but it would be 6 months, 12 months down the line, so you were always playing a bit of catch-up. So it's a good point.
You've also got the ease on SaaS of integrating with the Power Platform as well, so Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate. It's you can solve some what would be fairly complex problems and require developers quite easily in some of those platforms, and it's just almost a click and go kind of experience when you're using it with SaaS.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Of a lot of the setup that if you were trying to do it on PaaS or on Prem would take 2-3 days of quite complex configuration, and you've got to have exactly the right version of the software. Some of the platform software, so like Windows Server and SQL Server and that sort of stuff, has all got to be there, and you've got to have exactly the right cumulative updates, etc., which can be hugely disruptive. On SaaS, it's a wizard. You go into the wizard, 3 clicks. You're using BC from within Outlook, as we showed a few years ago. But not that many. I don't know an on-prem client who's implemented that. Whereas with SaaS, you can have it and it's just there, and you can use it if you want to, because why wouldn't you set it up when it's 4 clicks away?
I think the one thing with SaaS that a lot of people don't really take into account or don't realise, we used to have the joy of the occasional Microsoft audit, where they would want to go through everyone's software and make sure your SQL was correctly licensed and all your other licensing was good. And of course, that was the IT team's responsibility. So if Microsoft did that and they wanted to come and look at your on-prem stuff, they had the right to check it. You don't have to worry about any of that with SaaS. When you sign up and everything that you're using is included in that monthly per user cost, and you just know that you are absolutely bang on with the licensing rules. So it's a great thing not to worry about, and you don't get that nasty shock of someone saying, well, actually, you are out of sync with Microsoft's licensing rules, which we used to get occasionally on-prem. Mostly it wasn't intentional. It was just Microsoft changed them that frequently. It was really hard to stay up to speed with everything. So I think that's one area that people don't always consider, that and the security of the SaaS platform. If your hardware went down, you had an organization that typically would be on its knees until they could either get spare parts or they had to dual replicate every bit of kit and every bit of component that was in the network to make sure it wouldn't go down if there was a power.
And even that wasn't a guarantee, was it? And
no.
A driver update could take both ends of it down, and then you'd be really stuffed because everything had got to match up. So it was hard work to try and keep that on. Whereas, on Azure, SQL Azure, your data is in 2 different geographic data centers and is within, what do they say, 5 seconds of complete synchronization. So the cost of doing that, actually, if you were doing it as an individual company, is just astronomical. But it's just provided as part of the kind of global scale of the Azure platform for SaaS. And SaaS, your backups are done automatically as well. So you've got 28 days, I believe, of backups that you can go back to. You have to request to restore them, but it's just done there, so it's worry-free. That's really where it's at.
The one thing we used to always get thrown at us when we started talking about cloud is, what happens if my internet connection at work goes down and I can't access my systems? That was always the killer point. I'm going to have all these people sat around and not able to work. But I think people now have just got, if the internet goes down, we've got problems. We can't connect to our bank. We can't connect to our customers, our website. All of those things suddenly becomes a concern. And actually, the way we're remote working now, or with people with 4G phones, we've found ways of getting around.
There's alternatives.
Yes,
and you can guarantee that servers being down caused a lot more grief in days of old than internet connections being down now. Then you were talking days. With internet, you're probably talking hours. So
people just go home and work, don't they? Or they go to the local McDonald's, or
they connect via the phones.
Or...
and obviously, on a SaaS or a PaaS platform, wherever you are, you just get access straight away.
So what sides do we worry about though? And what areas or what extra? We talked there a little bit that yes, there's a lot of the responsibility to be moved off. Where are people, or should people be putting investment into? We've talked about comms. Obviously, you should make sure you've got a really, really good line to the internet with some backup capabilities in there. What else should people... You've mentioned DevOps, James. I think a lot of people, there's another term that we use and maybe customers aren't always aware of that. How would you define DevOps, what it means to our customers?
It's sustainable software is another trendy term that you could use for it, really, because basically what it's doing, it's running a set of automated tests against the customizations you've got, against the latest version of the software as frequently as you want to, and coming back and saying this still works or this doesn't work. And the machine does that. So it's a process that you set up. It takes some machine time. So it does cost some money to run, but I would suggest that the cost of running the test is a lot less than the cost of the disruption if you weren't aware that it was going to break. So it's a little bit of insurance for your system, and it can just ensure that whatever changes you make in the future, it minimises your manual testing regime to the cosmetic. Really, it still makes sure that numbers add up and transactions appear where they should do, and all the rest of the things that you really want to happen, regardless of what anybody's done on any particular day, to do further changes. And as systems get more and more complex and more integratedly, I mean, it's really hard to do effective manual testing. I think it comes down more to the experience of the tester these days, because you can't try every permutation. So they've got to try and spot what breaks and try that and go, oh yes, it does break. And that's really tough for anybody, however long they spent working with this system, as it gets more and more sophisticated. DevOps again is going to become more and more of it. It's been a part of other IT platforms for a long time, and really DevOps has now come to the Dynamics platform in a major way in the last 2 years, and really again is going to be an essential part of our future, in the way that perhaps SQL management and optimization was in our past, but doesn't need to be anymore. So one day it may be redundant. Not sure when that is. Certainly not now.
And I guess that's just to clarify that's not necessarily the responsibility of the end user here. That's a service that we as a partner, we're picking up as something we do, that we make sure all those things are done with the customer, correct?
Yeah, because actually, what the customer needs is, the customer needs to see absolutely zero disruption. Actually, if the customer knows nothing about the DevOps process being run, that's perfect, because it means that it's run perfectly. If they're aware of it, actually, that's a failure. bizarrely as it says, because something's failed to test, something hasn't been changed in time. It's not all brought together. And so, this is I think, for 95% of customers, this is probably something that their partner will run. There'll be one or two that will run it themselves, where they've got an IT team that's familiar with the process. What's interesting is, if you've got an external website that's creating sales orders, for instance, and posting them through to your back-end Business Central system, you might do a test process that says, right, I'm going to push this in the front end of the website as a test, and I'm going to see what ends up being shipped out of Business Central as the other end of the test, and see whether that's end-to-end works. Now, that might be a bit more difficult for us as just the Business Central end of it to test if we want to do end-to-end. So there's lots of options there, but certainly I think breaking it down into smaller, what we call unit tests. So you're testing every individual step, and therefore the end-to-end should work is probably a way to go. But back to the other thing, just to bring us back to kind of the platform piece is, SaaS versus PaaS. I think, 18 months, 2 years ago, we were talking about PaaS having better performance than SaaS. One of the advantages of platform as a service, particularly on something like Azure, is you ring us up and say, it's not performing very well. It's slow. And, our operations team can turn the knob up, so to speak. Now, when you turn the knob up, the cost goes up. There's definitely a consequence of doing that, but potentially you're not stuck with your system running slow. We can keep turning that knob up until it gets fast enough for you. There's two aspects to that though. We shouldn't just use that. Badly performing software often means that there's a data issue or there's a coding issue. So what we tend to find is when systems first go live, they're nice and speedy and perform well. And then after kind of 12 months or even less sometimes, they start saying, you know what, this is really slow. And that's because they've got 100,000 records in a table suddenly after lots of shipments. And they're trying to do a filter that isn't in an index, and suddenly it's having to do what we call a table scan, go record right through that table from start to finish. That's where actually a developer needs to come along, look at precisely what is causing this horrible word, so our system's slow. Yeah, that's the sentence we get. Actually, generally, it comes back to there's 1, 2, 3, 4, not many times I've seen more than 5 or 6 specific places it's slow, and actually that's slowing everybody else down, because while the system's doing that table scan, it's not necessarily transacting other parts of the system efficiently. So I'm still a big factor of we shouldn't use the performance of PaaS to mask what are underlying issues with other areas of the system, be it too much data that you don't need to keep, or fact that from a coding point of view, we need to put an index in the right place.
I suppose what it does do though, James, is if you do have an immediate issue, while that's being resolved, you can overcome it, even though it's a sticking plaster on it. But you could turn the resource up while there's a plan being put in place to resolve the underlying issue.
Completely, and finding that underlying issue sometimes isn't as fast as you think it might be. Again, actually, we're probably better on PaaS at finding the issue because we've worked with SQL for longer, and certainly with SQL Azure for longer, and therefore we understand how to go and find, the long-running queries, etc., etc. Now, on SaaS, we have some amazing telemetry that Microsoft have put in. There's a guy called Kenny at Microsoft who is a telemetry evangelist, I would call him. He's fervent about it. And Microsoft themselves have looked at a lot of the telemetry for their own application and improved it significantly because of that. But this is new, guys, and I don't know of a partner in the world yet who's perhaps exploiting this as much as they should be, because it's not getting one or two people with the right skills is one thing. Getting a whole team of people who can just jump on it whenever something is reported as slow is a completely different challenge. And there's a whole new kind of technology base and methodology to learn there.
Okay, so finally then, is it worth just talking about existing customers? We touched on it earlier, and their route from where they are now to SaaS, if that's the decision that they want to make.
I think we touched on it a little bit, in terms of existing customers mainly going to Business Central 14, and then get it. You have to get your application right, so you have to get your customizations as extensions. You can't. You have to have an absolutely pristine set of CAL objects on BC14. Everything as extensions. Then we can either roll you direct to SaaS. Or we can upgrade you to what I would probably suggest is a two-step stage where we upgrade you to kind of Business Central 17. That won't be difficult. That's hours, not weeks. If you're going from BC 14 all AL to BC 17 with extensions. And then it's a case of once you're on 17, once that's working successfully on PaaS, then we can move you across onto SaaS if you want to. It's getting to the point where you would look at each customer and say, why wouldn't you? For the majority now, probably. I think
and they
the majority
can take all the data. They can take all the
across.
data with them, so no history's lost. Should you want to, you can take all your data.
Well, you can. The size of the data is the issue. So on SaaS, you have an 80 gigabyte limit, before you start paying for additional data. And promise you do not want to pay for additional data because the cost is astronomical for additional space. And don't forget 80 gigabytes, that sounds a lot, but once you've got, that's 80 gigabytes for your live system and your sandboxes, isn't it, Matt? Am I right in saying that?
Covers the whole lot.
Yeah, and given that most of them are about the same size, you've got half and half, haven't you?
Yeah, and it's about, I think it's $32.50 a gig for storage space, which if you go on Amazon and look at the cost of a disk and you'll realise how expensive that is.
But, and the other thing is, Liz, I would say that most customers don't necessarily on SaaS have just one sandbox. No. You can have up to 3, and a lot of them choose to have at least 2. So, they'll have one for long-term development and testing, and they'll have another one which is a snapshot of their live system for this went wrong yesterday. I want to work out exactly what happened. So actually, I'd probably contend that you need enough space to split it 3 ways, not just 2.
But there's no harm in being tied in if it forces people to consider, what data they have, what they need, and it forces people to think about a clean-up. Then there's no harm in that.
Well, I think customers already on SaaS need to do that before they hit the data limits. Mm-hmm. It's better to, again, it's like we said about Devops, like being prepared for a problem is a lot less bother than just hitting the roadblock. And data sizes is one thing that Business Central is a lot on SaaS is a much bigger issue than it was on PaaS or On Prem.
Microsoft are bringing some tools out for SaaS to help that in terms of data compression. But
and how about and monitoring? If you go over the storage limit, what happens? Does it just happen and then you get a bill, or how does it work?
You get a warning. That you need to buy some more. You can't create any more sandboxes. I don't know what happens if you have, let's say, a 40 gig database, or let's say a 42 gig database, and you want to create a sandbox and that takes you to 84. Will it let you do it?
It won't let you do it. I've tried.
Okay.
I've tried that situation. The other thing, what would happen if you've already got you've got, say, a 38 gig sandbox in there, and then your production database got to 44 or hit up used all the remaining space. I'm told it doesn't stop production. I remember somebody saying once.
Yeah, that's right.
But I don't know exactly how that works in terms of you just get warning after warning after warning, and then eventually I guess they give you a phone call or something old school like that, maybe. I don't know. Stop you creating and posting a new transaction. But, it is something to think about with, and maybe for some of our bigger customers, that will be a reason for staying on PaaS. Because, you look at some of our bigger customers, they need to reduce the size of their database by a factor of 10 to even get into the 80 gig.
I've got tables nearly that size, let alone whole databases. So
yeah, but there's a question of whether they should be that size. I mean,
100%,
keeping data. We could have a whole podcast on data management, couldn't we?
Yeah. Well, there you go. Liam, make a note. We'll do that one in the future.
There's the next episode. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my pet hate as well. So. Well,
talking about different tables, it does store lots of data, lots of the same data in lots of different places, doesn't it? So if you don't go and use it, you shouldn't keep it. Anyway, any final points that anybody wants to cover, or should we call it a day and go on to our next episode, which is clearly we've got lined up already.
I think, yeah, managing your data. I think that's we do that one next.
Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you for your time, people, and have a great day. And thanks for listening. Please subscribe if you're listening on your favourite podcast platform. Hopefully, we'll bring you some interesting conversation around Dynamics soon. Thank you.